Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast with Robert Glasscock. I'm Thomas Miller, and on the full moons, there's something that I do on the daily Fun Astrology podcast, Robert, that I'm not going to ask you to do with me, but I've gotten the coyote howl down pretty good. It goes something like this. Ow! You can drag it out as long as you have breath there. But that's not a sound effect. So we think about the moon. We think about following the moon around. And then there are some interesting things that Robert has in store that we're going to talk about that you might think through, especially related to your health or even making some decisions through the month. Why don't we, I don't know if you want to start at a new moon or the full moon, but why don't we walk people through these lunar cycles?
Great. These repeat every 28 days. So this cycle of development is built into everybody from birth because we're exposed to it over and over again every 28 days. So the new moon is when the sun and the moon are conjunct, when the moon appears to be in the same sign and degree as the sun. And whatever that degree is and whatever house it falls in and whatever houses in the natal chart are ruled by the sun and the moon will come together at a new moon in a particular house. And new moons are a good time to start things, because the new moon then goes on, it moves past the conjunction with the sun, and then it begins to be a waxing moon. It's increasing in light. So the next phase, it'll pass through a sextile to that conjunction point, and then it will square. When the moon squares the sun, you get a first quarter moon. And that's roughly 7 days after the conjunction of the moon with the sun. So 7 days after the beginning of anything is going to mark a turning point. You could call it a crisis. Sometimes it really is a crisis if it happens to trigger major planets, let's say, in the chart. But even just taken alone, it's a turning point in whatever began under the new moon. And it can be something trivial. It doesn't always have to be a major event. Usually it isn't. But it's great to be aware of what began at the new moon, and then to be aware of 7 days later, there's going to be a turning point in it. Something is changing, which alter, and either what you started at the new moon, you will give up at the first quarter, or you will solve a challenge or problem related to it and go on with it. And then at the second quarter, or the full moon, which is the moon opposite the sun, at a full moon you have a realization of what you started at the new moon. And then at the second quarter, or the third quarter moon, depending on how you count these and dub them, that's the moon in a 10th house square to the moon, as compared to the first quarter moon, which is a 4th house square. At a 10th house square, then you have a culmination of what began under the new moon. And then the moon will gradually, and by then, of course, it begins to, after the full moon, the moon begins to wane. So it begins to decrease in light. And after that 10th house square, it then will be moving toward the moon. It becomes a gibbous moon. It seems to disappear. And then it conjuncts the sun again in a new sign, a new house, and starts that 28-day lunar cycle over again. So if you think about that, you can simply be aware of when things start. If somebody comes to you, you're having lunch with somebody, let's say, and they bring up a topic that's very interesting to you, or they bring up a suggestion that, hey, you ought to try this, or you ought to do that, or you ought to contact this person. Great, that's the new moon. And so you do. You write them, you email them, you call them, you set up an appointment, whatever. You have a conversation with a friend. Somebody told you, oh, somebody's upset with something you did, something you said. Okay, you hear that under a new moon. Then that should tell you, all right, I need to do something about this. What am I going to do? Well, within 7 days, you will, and probably about 7 days would be a good time to try and resolve that. Do you see what I mean? So you can use the lunar cycle to sort of time your actions in relationships to things that began under the new moon. And sometimes the new moon will correspond to a really important event, like a job interview, for example. So you go on a job interview, if it happens to be under a new moon, then you can know in 7 days there'll be a turning point of some kind. It may simply be a phone call. It may be in your own mind, you decide, I didn't like that job interview. I think I don't want this job. Or it could be the converse. I really love this job interview, and I'd like to now, 7 days later, just write them a confirmation email saying, thanks again, appreciate your time, whatever. And then expect again to see some kind of a realization when you get to the full moon about the job interview, for example. So you can use it that way. It's pretty practical, really, just to be aware of the lunar cycles and where they begin in your chart, what sign, what house, and what houses the sun and moon rule in your birth chart.
It really is almost like breathing, isn't it? It's just this cycle of flow, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing that I think for a lot of us is we're so busy these days. Now, hopefully they're listening to the Fun Astrology podcast too. They catch this on a regular basis of where the moon is, that being aware of it, what sign is it in today? When did it move in? What phase is it? These are all things that I think if we really want to take our astrology to a higher level, having these things in mind daily. I mean, we're following the cycle. We're following the flow of life.
And I love this cycle, Thomas. In a nutshell, you can apply it to anything. If you are aware that something has just begun in your life, something happened today. I was just thinking yesterday, I had 2 plants delivered that are on my patio here, and they're fairly large plants. And so in 7 days, here's the cycle. New moon is the awareness of the beginning of something. The first quarter moon is the development of it. It either goes forward at that point 7 days later, or it doesn't. That's the initial decision. Something will happen in about 7 days in relationship to what began under the new moon that will either propel it forward. It's a turning point. You see, it'll either propel it forward, or you will have decided, it's trivial, I don't care about it, and you'll let it go. If it continues, then at the full moon, you have realization. That's 14 days after what began. At 14 days, you have a realization of some kind. And then after that, another 7 days or 21 days after it started, you have the culmination of it. And then you have the final development of it, and you go into the next new moon. So it's that kind of cycle.
You know, what's cool is by random drawing, if you will, we picked this day that we're recording this now, not related to the moon. We didn't put a chart up and say, let's see what the chart looks like for that day. We didn't do that apologetically. Maybe we should have. But as it turned out, Robert, the moon is transiting right over your natal sun in Libra as we're recording this.
And how would you interpret that?
The old line, what he said.
And what he said.
Exactly what you said, because what we're doing is we're birthing it. That's new moon symbolism right there. The moon is on the sun.
And if I were reading my chart, if I were reading this man's chart for this today, I would say, were you in touch with someone at a distance, 9th house conjunction of the moon with my sun? Or were you in touch with someone at a distance about some kind of a partnership or joint venture that has to do with, philosophy or teaching or higher communications of any kind? Why, yes, I was. We were recording some podcasts
Libra.
on astrology. Yeah.
So that's where he's getting that, is Libra rules the 7th house partnership.
So you and I can both expect to see a turning point from just today in about 7 days.
Yeah.
And then in 14 days, we'll get a realization of what we just did today.
And actually, it'll be about
days. We'll get. Go ahead.
I say it'll just be about 7 days when the first one of these is released. It'll be a little bit before that, but about 7 days.
Okay.
Yeah. So there we go. We're already starting. So you better watch your calendar. It could get overly full. Guard your blockout days that you need to block out for other things. Likely to be productive. But that's a great example of using this on a regular basis, not just that you drop in on it every now and then, but literally breathing this. So actually we'll know that if we book our next session in 2 weeks, it will be the full moon related to your
The
sun.
realization of what we did today.
Yeah. So maybe,
and that's going to be true for every one of these recordings that we do, Thomas, because you and I are on a schedule basically of every 2 weeks. We record, 2 or 3, 4 podcasts, and then we do it again in 2 weeks.
yeah.
So this is built into the rhythm of how we are working together. And this is a partnership. So it's like a spiritual, philosophical marriage.
Worth considering. All right. Now, there's something else that was interesting. Somewhere along the way, and I can't remember where it was, you mentioned don't have surgery if the moon is in Leo.
Okay.
And some listeners responded to that. They wanted to know more. So can you walk us through what you were talking about there?
Yeah, this is very ancient. This goes back to Hippocrates, who was an astrologer as well. He's famous for this quote in Greek, I guess. A physician who practices medicine without a knowledge of astrology is a fool. Okay. And most people don't realize astrology by the time of Hippocrates, which is, I think, around 300 AD, somewhere there, it was already ancient then, astrology was. So his observations and his rules are still passed on today. And one of them is don't perform surgery on the part of the body ruled by the sign that the moon is in. So if you have the moon in Aries today, Hippocrates would say, don't have neurosurgery, don't have plastic surgery on your face, don't have any surgery involving the head or face. This would include cataract surgery, for example.
Don't touch me even above the shoulders, right? At that point, stay below the shoulders,
at least
with that knife,
with a scalpel.
Yeah,
with a scalpel. We're only talking about surgery. You feel free to kiss me.
Yeah, well, eye surgery is a little different now. Lasers and knives. Stay away from the head if the moon is in Aries.
Well, and this is the point too. You have to be real here. The old thinking, I guess, was that if you did perform surgery to the part of the body ruled by the sun, the sign that the moon is in that day, then there's more of a likelihood of blood loss, excessive bleeding, and so on. I don't know if that's true or not. And the real truth is, if you need surgery, if you have an option, for example, your doctor says, let's do this bypass next Wednesday, and you look and you see the moon is in Leo, you will say, is there any way we can postpone this until Friday, because I have something I cannot get out of on Wednesday? And generally, you'll get a sure, depending on the doctor's schedule. But if you're dealing with something serious like that, you need the surgery. So if the only day you can get it, the moon is in Leo, fine, you're going to have to go with it. So you can get extreme with this stuff, just like anything else. But it's a good rule of thumb. So the moon in Aries, you want to avoid surgery to the head or face. The moon in Taurus, you want to avoid. Taurus does not rule the neck. I never have understood this. The neck is ruled by Gemini, just like all of the connectors in the body are ruled by Gemini. So Gemini rules the hands, the arms. It also is a co-ruler of the larger limbs, the legs, even though Sagittarius specifically rules those. But any connector, the neck is what connects the head with the torso. The larynx, the voice box, is absolutely Taurus. So if you had, laryngeal cancer, let's say, then you would try to avoid radiation or any other medical treatment on the day where the moon is in Taurus. Then you go into Gemini. Again, you're talking about the nerves, all the synapses in the brain, all of the nerves, and of course the limbs are ruled by Gemini. So you might want to avoid surgery to the limbs, for example, or to the lungs, which are ruled by by Gemini as well. on a day when the moon is in Gemini. If it's in Cancer, you want to maybe avoid surgery to the stomach, also to the testes or the ovaries, which are both ruled by Cancer. If you go into Leo, it's heart and cardiovascular surgery. Maybe you want to avoid on the day where the moon is in there. So that would not be necessarily the ideal day, if you can, to install a pacemaker. You'd want to wait until the moon got out of Leo. Also, back surgery, spinal surgery would be ruled by Leo as well. You go into Virgo, intestinal surgery, colonoscopies, that sort of thing. In Libra, the kidneys, the upper back, maybe, if you want to go that far with it. But certainly kidney surgery you want to avoid. You go into Scorpio, any kind of gynecological surgery or surgery to the reproductive system and the reproductive organs, as well as, by the way, to the nose. It's ruled by Scorpio.
Now, how is that it's because that's part of the face and head?
It rules, yeah, it is. And that's, again, Scorpio rules the sinuses and the nose. Very specifically in astrology, but particularly it rules the reproductive organs and the organs of elimination as well. So I frankly would avoid surgery to the colon, both with the moon in Virgo or the moon in Scorpio, either one. Same with Cancer. Cancer rules the skin, and it also rules the mouth. So you would want to avoid oral surgery or say, look at this, melanoma. Are you kidding me? If I discover melanoma, take it out today. I don't care where the moon is. Take it out today. Or whenever the doctor says, he's going to tell you, or she will tell you. But you don't mess around with melanoma. And there are a lot of things you don't mess around with. So it becomes, you can take all of this to extremes. I like doctors. I'm not one of these people that, my dad was a doctor, and thank heaven I was raised around doctors, and they're good doctors and they're bad doctors. And you can pretty much tell by their bedside manner which you got. So I listen to what I figure that if we create our own reality, then if I've created this health condition, then I've also created this doctor to come along and take care of it. That's how I look at this. So you get into Sagittarius. Again, that's the nervous system as well, because it's opposite Gemini, but it is the limbs particularly. Capricorn, people forget. Oh, Taurus also rules the thyroid, for example, I forgot that. Capricorn is the gallbladder, very specifically, but it's also the knees. So you would want to, and Cancer and Capricorn are both the axis of dental surgery, which I had a lot of in my life, 2 full mouth periodontal surgeries, and I've got Saturn in Cancer afflicted and so on. So Capricorn also rules the knees, and then you get into Aquarius. Yes, it's the ankles, and boy, I know a guy right now, a great big, like a linebacker sized guy, and he's an Aquarian. And he had ankle problems about 7 years ago, from which he is still suffering today. And it's affected his back because of the way it's made him walk, and they can't do anything about it surgically, not the ankles. In his case, they can't. So he's had to compensate 6 ways from Sunday. He's in pretty much constant pain. It's livable pain, but it's pain from the ankles. The real essential part of Aquarius is the circulatory system. So it's on that axis with Leo and also Scorpio and Taurus. But anyway, so as far as surgery and the day, the sign that the moon is in that day, you, I guess, would want to avoid ankle surgery, but also circulatory surgery. And then Pisces is, again, the glandular system in particular, and the immune system primarily is under Pisces, which rules the feet. So you certainly may have foot trouble. But if you're having immunotherapy, you would want to maybe be careful on a day where the moon is in Pisces, because your reaction, the glandular and immune system reaction to it, would be more extreme than other days, for instance. So those are ancient rules of thumbs. I don't know how practical they are, but the only surgery I've really ever had in my life was periodontal surgery. And I don't remember choosing the day at all. It was when I could make the appointment with the periodontist and you get it done.
Well, if you want to just follow the lunar influence on our lives, which is significant. I mean, I always go back to the moon. Whenever anybody wants to know how granular you get with this, follow the tide, or talk to the farmer or the teacher or the policeman or the teacher in school who would tell you about what it's like on a full moon compared to any other time of the month. I mean, I think there is
Well,
definite significance.
you get into the thing in natal astrology. For example, I have the moon in Aries at birth. It's in a grand cross with my ascendant, with Capricorn, and opposite my sun. Moon in Aries, if it is afflicted, can indicate anything from, it could be brain cancer, but it's really prone to strokes. That's the big one. So I know that about my own horoscope. Now, my dad had an aneurysm removed from his brain. He did not have a stroke, and they got the aneurysm, and that was fine. But there's that in his history that I'm certainly aware of. He also had colon cancer. So I started at, I guess, 68 or something, getting a colonoscopy every about 2 years from my
keep an
doctor.
eye on it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very treatable as long as you get it, as long as you catch it early. But for example, I have a dear friend, 10 years older, about 10 years ago. He's dead now, but he got diagnosed with colon cancer, and his doctor said, it's just, he told me he had a colonoscopy and they didn't find any polyps. And 6 months later, he was having symptoms, and they went in and looked, and suddenly the doctor said, my God, it looks like a polyp factory in there. So suddenly now this guy had colon cancer, and he got treated for it. The doctor told him, we'll find a cocktail and it will go into remission. And it did. But another doctor told me, yeah, what'll happen is they'll find a cocktail, it'll go into remission, and then it will come back with a vengeance, and he'll be dead within a year and a half, 2 years, which he was. So I stay on top of colon cancer because my dad had it. Didn't kill him, but by then he had so many things wrong, you see. So it's good to know your birth horoscope too. So already I know from just plus I have Uranus and Gemini in my sixth house of health. And I have Mercury, which rules that, in a semi-square to Pluto, which is Cancer if it's afflicted, in my eighth house of death. Had it from birth. So like an idiot, I smoked all of my life up until about 12 years ago. I quit once in LA for a year and a half, 2 years. But I've been a smoker. Well, I've gotten a pulmonologist now, and yes, I have some COPD. But I just had a checkup 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they did all the tests and more CT scans, and now I'm waiting for the doctor to come in and tell me what everything looks like. And he too is from India, and he sat down, the first words out of his mouth, you do not have lung cancer. Great. Now you do have COPD. I know this. So there it is at birth. So if you can look at a birth horoscope and realize that the first thing I knew about in my birth horoscope when I was 26 was diabetes. And I was at a doctor's, and he asked me when he found out what I did, he said, well, what does your horoscope have to say about your health? And I said, well, it says I'm potentially diabetic. And he looked at me and said, are you kidding? And I said, no, why? And he said, well, your blood sugar is right on the line between high normal and diabetic. So if you know that about yourself, you see what I mean? So you can get confirmation like this from doctors.
Let's wrap up with this, talking about the transiting moon again, back to the moon in the sky over our heads now. What are your thoughts as far as it being a trigger of things? Because it is the fastest moving body. So, for example, when Pluto transits something, it's not likely to instantly trigger something, but the moon moving so quickly, Mercury can be another trigger, Mars can be a trigger, Venus. What are your thoughts on that as far as, is it too granular to think of it that way, or is there something to it that, yeah, the moon aspecting one of our natal planets might fire something off?
Well, when you say it's too granular, I think probably so, because really over the years, sometimes the moon absolutely is a trigger. but often it doesn't seem to be near. We are not machines, and a lot of people think that astrology should be able to predict absolutely everything down to the day, or at least to the day, if not to the hour. And sometimes it can. Often it can, depending on the situation, but often it does not. It will predict a range within time and space where something is likely. So, but certainly it's an area of focus, but it depends whether it's mental or emotional focus. It can be both, because the moon is associated with the mind in astrology. People only think of Mercury, but the moon is too. So it can indicate a sort of focus, or just as it is with us today. And the transiting moon is exactly what you would think, us doing this. But I don't. I don't count on the moon to be a trigger in that way. And it's huge. To tell you the truth, it's very rare in predicting anyway, to need to get something down to the exact day. If you need to, you often can. And I'm talking about things like death even. You can often, and if there is a real need to know, then I think it's that, Thomas. The intent is crucial. If the person needs to know. I had a client once who, I was in New York on business, and she called me from LA. I didn't have my ephemeris or anything with me. And she was calling from California. Her sister had been a chronic alcoholic all of her life, and she was currently in Florida living with another couple who were taking care of her. And this client of mine said, they have let me know that they cannot handle her anymore. So I'm either going to have to, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'm going to have to put her in a facility. But if I do that, that means I've got to sell the family property in Florida. Can you see anything? And I called her back. I did have my ephemeris. I didn't have her birth chart. That's what I didn't have. So I thought, let me call you back in a half an hour. And I set up an horary chart for it. And just using an horary chart, it said the sister was likely to die in about 1 month. So I called her back and I said, if you can possibly wait until after the 1st of May, I think this decision will take care of itself. Are you telling me she's going to die? And I said, I can't say that. I'm just saying, if you can wait to make this decision till after the 1st of May, I don't think you will have to sell the family property. I was saying to her, in essence, she's very likely to die by the 1st of May, and you won't have to sell the property. But I didn't put it that way. But she understood what I was saying, and sure enough, she did. The sister did die. So that was a real need to know basis. And I have found over the years that astrology always works.
Was that related to the moon in that horary chart?
I don't remember because it was so long ago, and I don't have records for that one. I do have records for something I have done more recently along the same vein. With a student of mine in one of my classes at Kepler. Her mother wrote me late one night. I got the email at something like 1 a.m, talking about her father, my student's grandfather. He's been taken to the hospital. He's had a massive stroke. He's in intensive care. The doctors want to take him off of food and water for 6 days to see exactly what's going on with the brain tissue. I'm afraid if they do that, it'll kill him. My brother and sister want to go along with the doctors. Can you see anything? I can send you his birth chart or his birth certificate if I can find it. Well, I read this email and I thought, I'm not going to sit here and wait for her to find a birth certificate. This is too urgent. So I set up an horary, and it said he would be dead within 5 days. And it also said a lot of other things. And I wrote her back and told her that, in essence, of the 3 siblings, you are the one closest to his heart. He is ready to go, but he knows that you're not ready for him to go yet. And the reason why is because of all his 3 children, you're the one that's closest to his heart. What I would do is, maybe if he's in intensive care, he'll stay there. But I said, basically, I think he will probably die in about 3 to 5 days. So I didn't hear, and sure enough, about 10 days later, I got a letter from my student, from the man's granddaughter, and she said, "You were right. He died 3.5 days after my mom wrote you." And she said, "I still don't know how you did that without his birth certificate." But this is how astrology, it's a map of time and space at that moment. And if you understand what you're looking at, in my case, I was an astrologer 2,000 miles away from this total stranger, but this woman had written me with a serious problem that she needed some information on. And the minute that I understood what the question was and set up that orrery for where I was the astrologer, when I understood the question, I knew that that chart would give me the answer. I knew what house ruled her father. I knew what house ruled his death. And I looked at those rulers, and that's what it said, 3.5 days.
It's all incredible how this just fits together so beautifully. Robert, thank you for this. Thanks for taking us around the cycles of the moon. And if you would like to connect with Robert for a reading, we've got all that information. He is booking readings now about a month, a little bit more than that ahead. But you can get on the list, and your time will come up soon. That information is in the show notes, as well as our Discord channel and some other links there to podcasts that you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll be back with a new, fresh episode of Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.